Welcome to Connect, the monthly series to connect you with your community. In each episode, we speak with experts, innovators, and community members, and together explore themes of loneliness, social connections, and healthy aging across Massachusetts. I'm your host, Sandra Harris, the state president for AARP Massachusetts and co-leader of the Massachusetts Coalition to Build Community and End Loneliness. Today, we are talking about Alzheimer's disease, roadmaps for prevention and early diagnosis. More than 6 million Americans are currently living with Alzheimer's disease. Without a cure, that number is estimated to reach 16 million by 2050. With 1 in 8 Americans over 65 living with Alzheimer's, it is likely that you already know someone impacted by the disease and want to better understand how you can stay connected to them or what you can do to manage your risk. According to the Alzheimer's Association, 35% or more of one's risk for Alzheimer's disease or other dementia can be eliminated by a brain-healthy lifestyle and keeping up with one's overall health. Exploring this topic with us today is Dr. Christine Ritchie, co-director of Massachusetts Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, Outreach, Recruitment and Engagement Corps, and director of the Dementia Care Collaborative at Massachusetts General Hospital. Welcome, Christina. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Sandra. It's really wonderful to be here.
Christine, in addition to directing the Mass General Hospital Center for Aging and Serious Illness, you also serve as one of the co-directors of Massachusetts Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, Outreach, Recruitment and Engagement Corps. Can you please tell us about your work and what inspired you to it?
I'd be delighted to. So just a few things about the Massachusetts Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. The Massachusetts Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, and as you said, that's a mouthful. We often affectionately call it MADRIC, is one of the 2 oldest Alzheimer's Disease Research Centers in the country. There are now 33. These are all funded by the National Institute on Health. And their goal is to do several things, but first and foremost is to both improve the quality of life for people living with dementia along with their care partners and ultimately find a cure for dementia, including Alzheimer's disease. The Outreach, Recruitment and Engagement Corps, which is the part of this center that I have the honor of being a co-lead for, really focuses on making sure that information about dementia and information about participation in research related to dementia and dementia care is out there in the public so that people know about dementia, have the tools to understand how to navigate the care system related to dementia, and ultimately can participate in research to hopefully ultimately eliminate dementia.
Okay. We often use the term interchangeably, I think, Alzheimer's and dementia. Are they the same?
Great question. So I think of dementia as sort of the umbrella term, sort of like when we think about cancer, we think about cancer as the umbrella term, but then there are many different kinds of cancer. And Alzheimer's is one of several different kinds of dementia. So it is a dementia. It's the most common cause of dementia. But there are other types of dementia as well, including Lewy body dementia, vascular dementia, mixed dementia, early onset dementia, to name a few. So when we say Alzheimer's disease or Alzheimer's dementia, we often talk about them as if they're the same, but it's really one of a multitude of different types of dementia.
Christine, we all experience memory loss as we age.
Mm-hmm.
At what point, what is normal change, and when should we be concerned?
This is, I think, something that for most of us goes through our mind sometimes several times a day. Like, is this something I should be worried about, or is this something that is natural part of aging? And the way to think about this is that as we age, we do have some difficult, what I call, retrieving information out of the filing cabinet. So the information is in the filing cabinet. We have the ability to ultimately get to that filing cabinet, but it may take us just slightly longer to find it in the filing cabinet. So this whole concept of retrieval is something that does change as we age. So like we may think of a word, be like, I know that word, and then it'll come to us a few minutes later, but it will come to us. Or we may go into another room and say, wait, why did I come into this room? Oh, and then I go back to the original room and I was like, oh yes, I went to get my cup of coffee. So we remember the thing that we actually had forgotten shortly thereafter. Whereas in dementia, or when we start developing worrisome signs for dementia, we actually start having the kind of forgetfulness that really impacts our daily life. So that may mean that I will ask you many times, Sandra, what time is my doctor's appointment? And you'll tell me, and I'll say a few minutes later, Sandra, what time is my doctor's appointment? And I won't be able to actually keep that information imprinted on my mind. I may have difficulty learning new information, and some things that I've known in the past how to do start becoming difficult. When those sort of things start to happen, then it's probably worth getting some evaluation and making sure that there aren't other things going on.
Christine, what should I do if I'm worried that I or someone I care about may be showing signs of early dementia?
It's a great question, and it's a very important one. The first thing I would do is I would start really paying attention to the sort of things that person may be doing and their level of consistency about it. So sometimes when people are really stressed, or they have a lot on their mind, or they haven't slept well, they may demonstrate more trouble with forgetfulness or keeping track of things. If that's just sort of a blip in the screen, it's worth sort of paying attention to that. If on the other hand, you're starting to see some consistency with some of these changes, and you're starting to notice perhaps some new changes, that's when it's really worth actually seeking medical attention, going to your primary care provider, saying, I'm worried about my memory, or I'm worried about my loved one's memory, and here's what I'm observing. And the more information that you have that you can communicate about some of these very specific things that are going on, the more information that will offer to your doctor, and then they will be able to do some further assessment and screening to see whether or not there might be cause for additional concern.
My own 95-year-old mother is living with dementia, and as her child, should I be concerned that it may be passed on to me or a sibling? Are there any strong genetic links to the disease?
So Alzheimer's, there is a certain kind of dementia, not Alzheimer's dementia, but there is a certain kind of dementia that is familial, where there is a very clear passing on of the dementia from generation to generation. That is not actually true for Alzheimer's disease. So for your mother, it's just as likely that you wouldn't get it perhaps as you would, but it is true that having a family history of dementia is one of many risks. Just like having a family history of heart disease is a risk for getting heart disease, but it's not for sure that you will get heart disease, or for sure that you're going to get dementia. It's sort of one of those things that are worth paying attention to, and then looking at the ways that you can reduce risk by some of the lifestyle changes that you can make.
Let's talk about some of the myths of Alzheimer's. Can you share some of those?
Oh, there are quite a few of them. Probably the one we hear about the most is that memory loss is a natural part of aging. And I am always worried about that for several reasons. First of all, is I think it makes it seem like aging is associated with cognitive changes that are ubiquitous, and that's just not the case. And I think it lends itself to a kind of even an ageism when we think that memory loss is a natural part of aging. Memory loss is not a natural part of aging. It actually is something that is related to a particular kind of pathology or condition that actually warrants evaluation, as we were just talking about. And in fact, with some of the newer treatments that are coming out, paying attention to early diagnosis of dementia becomes even more important, because that's when some of these treatments may be the most effective. And so thinking that memory loss is just aging actually, I think, does two things. One is it makes it seem like aging has this characteristic, which is actually not a normal part of aging. And then number two, it may keep someone from getting the kind of assistance that we were just talking about, actually going and seeking an evaluation to see whether or not actually they do have something like Alzheimer's disease that might be amenable to either treatment that we have now or treatment that hopefully we'll soon discover in the near future.
So, what are some steps that we can take to reduce our risk for dementia?
There are a lot of steps, and this is the fun part to talk about. It looks like over a third of the risk that we have for dementia can be mitigated just by making these lifestyle changes, and they're things that are within our grasp. And so the first thing probably that I would say is having a healthy diet. And what we often say is what's good for your heart is good for your brain. So when we think about what's good for our heart, we know that it's reducing saturated fats and too much animal fat, avoiding simple carbohydrates, eating more fruits and vegetables. Good news, same thing holds true for your brain. And in addition, it looks like for brain health, other things that might be important are an increased consumption of nuts and of berries, and perhaps of deep seawater fish like salmon that seem to also have brain benefits. So first would be nutrition. The second is exercise. So we now have many, many studies that show that exercise is associated with improved brain health. And the studies seem to suggest that ideally we should be getting around 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous exercise per week. Now that's not nothing. That's actually quite a lot of exercise, but you know, a walk in your neighborhood, or using a stationary bike, or getting involved with other people in things like dancing or other kinds of activity all count. Gardening, even housework. So getting those 150 minutes in is feasible, but it does require some intentionality. The third way we can reduce our risk is through better sleep. This is one that I think about a lot for myself because I'm not so great at it, but trying to make sure that we're getting at least 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night can be incredibly important for improving our brain health. We think in part because it's during our sleep that some of this sort of waste that is accumulated in our brain that needs to be gotten rid of, that's when it seems like the waste team comes and reduces the waste during our sleep. So that's also important. The fourth thing is social connection. So we're talking a lot about the importance of connection, and I think keeping in mind that intellectual stimulation, that our being together, our connecting and communicating about life and about events and about what we're learning is critically important for reducing our risk. So not only is it a nice to have, it actually is a must have in terms of reducing our risk. And then I would say the fifth thing is really thinking about what are the things that are causing stress in our life? Are there ways that we can engage in activities that reduce that stress?
But we oftentimes hear about hearing loss. What
Yes,
do you think about
thank
that?
you for bringing that up. So hearing loss is a relatively new finding that suggests, based on some recent studies, that hearing loss is a risk factor for the development of dementia, and good news, hearing aids seem to be protective against that risk. So it's not like, oh gosh, I'm having trouble with my hearing and there's nothing that I can do. It turns out, and this was based on a very large study in the United Kingdom from the UK Biobank, when they compared people who had hearing loss to those who had hearing loss with hearing aids, and then those who didn't have hearing loss. The people who had hearing loss and were using their hearing aids had the same amount of risk as those without hearing loss. So the critical issue here around hearing loss, I'm so glad you brought it up, is when we start developing hearing loss, and remember, many times it's other people who tell us that we're having difficulty with our hearing, it's really worth seeking assistance and getting a hearing aid. And happily now, it's much easier to access hearing aids at a much more reasonable cost than it used to be. And so definitely that's an important one. Thank you for bringing that one up.
Oh, you're welcome. Researchers around the world are really exploring ways to not only prevent Alzheimer's, but also provide opportunities for earlier diagnosis. There's a lot of buzz going on around about this simple blood test that may be helpful. Is there anything that you find extremely exciting about all the work that's going on?
I think this is one of the most exciting times in dementia research in the history of our understanding of dementia. Of course, it's growing our understanding. And it's exciting for a whole host of reasons. First is because we are understanding the actual pathophysiology of it better, which means that then we can start thinking about what are blood tests or what are ways that we can understand it better. Early on in my training, really the only way we were able to detect dementia was through a clinical evaluation. We didn't have blood tests. We didn't even have things like PET scans or ways through a spinal tap or a lumbar puncture to actually capture information that would help us know that someone has dementia. So we have come a long way in the detection. And while that blood test is not ready for prime time, I think in the next 5 years it will be. We will have a blood test that will help increase our ability to detect that someone is potentially developing dementia.
I know that you are an advocate for people participating or volunteering in research studies. What is the value of participation in research, and what kind of study participants are most needed?
Great question. And we've been talking about sort of all that's happening in research, so I think it's a timely question as well. You know, I think we've come to appreciate the breadth and depth of value around research study participation in a way that we didn't really appreciate many years ago, and I think it's for a whole host of reasons. One is because we have many more safeguards around research. We are very careful now when we conduct research to think about how we keep people safe and how we make sure people know about the risks and benefits of study participation. And so I think those safeguards make it much more sort of conducive to think about study participation. And for me, why I increasingly want to be a part of a study so that I can not only benefit for myself, but also benefit for society. So what are some of those values? Well, first is that we advance knowledge when we participate in studies, and I think that's very important. The second is that we make sure that people like ourselves are actually represented in research. So let me just give you an example of how this is a real thing. For many, many years, the main people who were participating in research were men. So what about if I actually then am being given a drug, I would want to know, well, were people like me also part of these studies? And back in the day, the answer was no. Happily, that's changed. But even to this day, we know, for example, that people from underrepresented minority groups are less well represented in research. That means that if I come from one of those groups, I'm thinking to myself, well, does this particular treatment work the same for me? The only way I know is by actually participating in research and being able to then speak into the larger conversation of, yes, we have representativeness from everyone that this particular treatment is important. The other value for research that many people don't think about is it actually gives you access to more resources. You're actually right there, and if you have a question about something else, you're more likely to be connected to people who have the answer. We know now from a number of studies that people, if you just compare people who are research study participants who aren't, that people who are actually have better outcomes. And my hypothesis is that they're actually just being monitored more carefully. If something goes awry, someone is there to sort of be aware, and they have access to resources that those who aren't study participants have. So those are a few. There are more I could go on and talk about, but hopefully that gives you some sense of why there's so much value in participating in research.
Our field reporter is with Steve Wesler, who recently wrote an op-ed in the Boston Globe about his Alzheimer's diagnosis. Let's hear what he has to say.
I'm Jorge Quiroga. I'm a member of the Executive Council of AARP of Massachusetts, a former, I should say, retired television journalist, 45 years with the ABC station in Boston. I covered during that time just about every possible kind of story, as they say, the good, the bad, and the ugly. But certainly the most meaningful part of the job was getting the opportunity to connect with people who shared their very personal stories with me, no more so than our guest today. I'm talking about Steve Wesler, a professor at the College of the Atlantic in Bar Harbor, Maine. He teaches courses on human rights there. And the subject today is Alzheimer's disease, and I can't say it can't get any more personal than this. This is the op-ed that Steve wrote on the Boston Globe. The title says it all. I have Alzheimer's disease. This is what I need from you. Steve, thank you so much for being with us today. Tell me, what compelled you to write such a personal account?
So professionally, I work on human rights issues, not as much anymore, and when I saw something going wrong, I jumped in, but I've never done it before this time when it was about me.
Did you first share the diagnosis with a small group of friends, and did that get a little bit, that circle get a little larger? Or was it hard to do because it's almost like a stigma to it?
It is, and the part of this that I think changed everything was that I decided I was going to tell my class. And it was a class on hate crimes, and I told them to it, and I asked them, everybody, can you raise your hand if you don't know about Alzheimer's? Nobody raised their hand, which really struck me.
You also talked about that sense of isolation that people are, even people who know, are afraid to mention. I think you said, like if you have cancer and you have a friend say, hey, how's it going? How you doing? But you said nobody said that to you. Nobody asked you that question at first.
No, I mean, there were some, but there were people that I would be that already knew about it, and I'd meet at a restaurant with my partner, and nobody would say anything. They would talk about something else and just said, and I think it's absolutely right. If it was about cancer at this point, it would have been a different thing.
Help us understand the trajectory, the personal coming to terms with the outcome.
I think there are two answers to that. One is I just was going to continue to do my work as long as I can. That's not going to last, maybe 1 year, maybe one more, maybe earlier. But there was something else that's for the first time in medicine, there is a drug and now two others that have some similarity that when you take it, it slows down the process.
Mm.
And I'm hoping that's going to come to me in the next couple of weeks.
And imagine you're hitting a point that's really important. Some people, because I know from, again, personal experience, kind of reject the notion that I think I've got Alzheimer's, and refuse to get diagnosed. And you kind of slide into it with rejection, but being aware of it early and trying to get some intervention early can help.
And because of this new drug and the other drugs coming down the pipeline, it's critically important to talk to a neurologist who deals with this kind of issues.
If I may ask, what's your advice to people and family members and friends who know somebody who has Alzheimer's?
When you see them, assuming it's in the right scenario, to first to say, I'm sorry that you have Alzheimer's. And the second, is there anything I can help?
Imagine if it's possible to is it possible to maintain humor, a sense of humor about things? Because I think, remember the old Reader's Digest, laughter is the best medicine?
It's hard to laugh at the disease, but the things that go on can be funny.
Well, Steve, thank you so very much. It was a pleasure to meet you, an honor to meet you. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, your insight, and your advice on this very important subject.
Well, thank you for getting me here.
And Sandra, back to you.
Thank you, Jorge. Christine, before leaving, what is the one message you would like to leave with our viewing audience?
I would say the one message I would like to leave is that dementia, as you said early on, is something that is part of our world. It's in the fabric of the life that we lead now, with so many people experiencing it, either through a loved one or maybe for themselves. There are things that we can do, and probably the top three is: number one, if you're worried, to seek evaluation. Number two, if you have risk factors, think about actually reducing the risk. And number three, if you're able, participate in research. It will benefit you and it will benefit those around you.
Thank you, Christine, for not only being with us today, but for the leadership you and your colleagues are providing to prevent and find the cure for Alzheimer's disease and related dementia. So thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you, Sandra. It's a real joy.
Good. And thanks to you, our audience. We hope you have learned something today to expand your understanding of steps you can take to prevent Alzheimer's disease. We also hope to have inspired you to become a partner in helping researchers discover new ways to potentially diagnose, treat, and prevent Alzheimer's disease and related dementia by volunteering for research studies. We look forward to seeing you again next month for another episode of Connect. Until then, let's take time to stay connected to our loved ones, our neighbors, and our communities. Visit us at inlonelinessma.com to watch past episodes of Connect. Learn more about the coalition and ways you can get involved in addressing the loneliness epidemic in the coming